In the words of Ecclesiastes, a season is set for everything, a time for every experience under heaven, a time for dancing and a time for wailing, a time for birthing, a time for dying, a time for speaking, a time for silence, a time for seeking, a time for losing. So we'll begin our service with the recitation of psalms and prayers, and in this way we'll link our tradition and our precious legacy to the life of Nancy Rosen Davis. We begin with the 23rd Psalm, first in the Hebrew and then the English.
Mizmor LeDavid, Adonai Ro'im, Lo Exor, Vino Deshe Yabitseini, Al Memenuchot Nashir Shovev Yancheni V'Maglei Tzedek Leman Shemo Gam Ki Elech B'Getz Al Mavet Lo Yirah Shivtecha u'min shantecha heima yenachamuni Ta'arok lefanai shulchan neged tzorerai Dishanta b'shemen roshi Kosi Revaya Ach Tova Chesed Yedifoni Kol Yemei Chaya V'shavti b'veit Adonai Liorech
Please join me. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He guideth me in straight paths for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou hast anointed my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Source of all, Ribono Shel Olam, we ask for comfort to those who deeply mourn the loss of the one near and dear to them. Be with them in their sorrow. Give them faith to know that you are with us in this world and the next. Together we say, Amen. Our condolences go out to Nancy's family, to her children, Alan and Judy and Jimmy and Vicky and Carol and Steve. To her grandchildren, Melissa and Kimberly, Jonathan and Megan and Lewis and Rebecca. Her great-grandchildren, Caitlin and Bryn. Her sister Margie and Chuck. Nieces and nephews, Scott and Rebecca and Wendy and David and Steve. And her great-nieces, Daya, Isabel, and Hannah. As you can hear, she leaves a legacy of family and community. Each of them carry memories and warmth of her generosity, her loving kindness, and her strength. And so we'll begin with the eulogies. Alan will begin representing the family.
I just had a couple of stories. An interesting Nancy fact that we talked about last night with the family. I was down in Houston about 10 years ago, and I was thinking back to when I was younger. And if you've ever gotten a letter from Nancy in the mail, you always knew right away when you went through the mail which was hers because it had green ink on there. And I was here and I said to her, you know, Mom, I never told you how cool I thought it was. You had a signature ink color. And she looked at me like I was from Mars. And she said, what do you mean a signature ink color? I said, well, green. You know, when I was in kindergarten and I had an excuse, and you sent me, you sent me the excuse with the green ink. And she said, that was never a signature ink color. I never thought about it that way at all. She said, when I was younger, I would sit home at the desk and I'd want to write a letter. So I would take a fancy sheet of stationery at the desk and I would print it out. And then I would reach for the pen and the pen would be gone. Somebody would have stolen it. So I discovered that if I had a pen with green ink in it, nobody would go anywhere near it. So I always had that pen, and she used that, as far as I know, she didn't even like the color green. But it was just, something that she used. So there goes the story of the signature ink color that I've always thought about. And the second thing, if you think back to your earliest memories when you were a kid, maybe you have something when you were 5 years old, and you can picture it, and you can picture everybody who was there at the time and what was going on, and maybe you have no other thoughts until you were 7, and something happened when you were 7, and then 11. So I was thinking about the time I was 7, and we lived in Long Island, and once a week, Mom, Dad, Jimmy, and I would head down to Brooklyn to have dinner with my Grandpa Rosen, my father's father. And we'd be on the Belt Parkway in our 1950 blue Dodge, and Mom and Dad would be in the bench seat in the front, and I'd be in the back with Jimmy, and Jimmy would have his usual position where he would be standing up in the back, leaning against the seat, and that was the only way he ever traveled that way. I mean, who needs those car seats so you had to buckle him in? He just stood there. So we were heading down on as I say, the Belt Parkway, and for some reason, I have no idea why I did this, but I turned to Mom and I said, Mom, why do people die? And she thought for maybe a few, 10, 15 seconds, and she said, well, I think people die because they get old and they get tired of living. They've done everything they're going to do. They've been everywhere they're going to go. And it's just kind of fitting. It's just, they just kind of fall asleep and go. And I started thinking, if I was 7 years old when I said that, she was just 27 when she came up with that thought, and how perceptive that is. And what's so amazing to me is when you look back and realize that was 61 years from that point. She nailed it. I mean, 61 years later, it was exactly what happened. She had 2 wonderful marriages behind her. She had been all around the world. She had 3 semi-okay kids, and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. And it just kind of brings me peace, because it seems like everything happened exactly the way it was supposed to, even 61 years before. And I love you, Mom. Thank you.
Thank you. I think it brings us all peace to know that her high energy and life force is still with us. Nancy was born on the south side of Chicago to Portia and Lou Lipa. And she was born prematurely in an age where the medical field really didn't have a lot of technology to deal with the situation. And so it was at birth that she approached her first challenge in life. And she approached it and surmounted it with courage and with strength and determination. Her father, Lou, worked in the scrap metal business on the south side of Chicago. And it was a business that was populated with shady characters and crooks. And so Lou, her father, built a reputation as a prince among thieves. And so Nancy's mother had a brilliant mind and a passion for chemistry as a pre-med student. She was born ahead of her time. She didn't quite make it to medical school as the gender bias worked against her, and her family needed her to go to work. And she worked as a secretary at the underwriter's laboratory, still using her mind. Nancy grew up and attended the University of Chicago Lab School, which was a cutting-edge experimental curriculum. Some of those technologies caught on and most didn't. And she grew up on the South Shore with her little sister Margie, with the appropriate sibling bickering and fighting. And Nancy was working as an administrator at the Army Transportation Corps when she met a handsome soldier, an older man by 10 years named Ray. And he was a Jewish boy from Brooklyn, so off they went to start a family in Brooklyn, New York. Ray was a butcher, and so he opened up a butcher shop inside of a larger store. And soon he expanded that butcher shop into a grocery store, and their young family began to grow. First came Alan, and then Jimmy. And then they lived this total immersive Jewish community in Brooklyn. And meanwhile, Nancy was taking care of the house, developing her knitting skills. Ray was working long hours and brought home the groceries from the store every night. And after a while, the market and the landscape in Brooklyn began to shift, and the store began to decline. And he continued in the grocery business as they moved out to Cedarhurst, and Nancy began to get more serious about her knitting. And from Cedarhurst they moved to Long Beach and continued to grow as a family. And Carol came along, and Nancy was raising this family, raising the children from home. And through all this journey, she opened up a knitting store in her basement. And the customers would wander into the home and spend time shopping for yarn, taking knitting classes from Nancy. Ray worked long hours, and so it was up to Nancy to be the homemaker, the nurturing presence, and the disciplinarian. And she ran a tight ship. And she never seemed to tire or slow down. The woman was born premature and in danger, and blossomed into a strong and determined force of life. The children remember their parents' home filled with people as their parents hosted parties and dinners and bridge games and mahjong. The business in Long Beach took a downward turn, and Ray was offered a job in Houston, Texas. And when Ray told Nancy about the opportunity, her response was, "Are you out of your mind?" A year later, and amid subway strikes in New York, they sold the store and moved out to Houston to find good work. And once in Houston, they joined Beth Israel, made lots of new friends, playing bridge and socializing just as before. And Nancy became a partner in a needlepoint store that they bought their home and set up their home in Memorial. Texas was a bit of a culture shock for everyone involved, but they enjoyed a nice life, good work, community, recreation. In 1978, Ray passed away suddenly, and Nancy mourned and healed. She moved out to Fadrin and worked to make a living. Years later, Nancy met Bob, who was a bit older than she. They married and enjoyed a beautiful life together. Their children grew up, married, and had children of their own. And Nancy was loved and adored by her grandchildren They were blessed with a doting and loving grandmother. The grandkids from out of town enjoyed vacations in Houston, eating chocolate cake batter from the beaters, shopping, lots of shopping, followed by private fashion shows for their grandmother and chocolate cake for breakfast. It was heaven on earth. The in-town grandkids spent Friday nights at their grandmother's house and woke up to waffles and pancakes for breakfast. She'd pick them up from school and take them out for donuts and frozen yogurt, shopping. She took them to the symphony. She taught them and invested in them. She taught them to cook and to bake and to knit. Even as a grandmother, she had this indomitable life force. She was athletic. She was doing jackknives off the diving board. Her energy never stopped. She was an early adopter of technology. She had a smartphone. She emailed and texted to her grandchildren. Her nephews and nieces also have fond and wonderful memories. A wonderful woman with a big heart. Her nephew Steve sent a beautiful message for the occasion. There are many qualities, he writes, that I'll forever remember my Aunt Nancy for, but none more than her overarching hospitality. I don't think there was a time that I visited, he writes, with family or without, when I wasn't made to feel like visiting royalty. That's what Nancy could do. The meals, the snacks, the excursions, the elaborate get-togethers. Nancy was a hostess extraordinaire who made one feel as if her home and her schedule had been designated entirely to accommodate you. She had a one-of-a-kind gift for giving. Nancy was blessed to travel the world. She boarded the Concorde for a trip around the world. She was on the QE2. She traveled and then she shared her picture albums with her friends and her family. She accomplished much in her life. She made beautiful connections with her family and with her friends and her community. And so we can now pause to remember her essential characteristics that animated her so beautifully and so intensely during her life. And those characteristics that were in her, she has successfully shared, and they now transition into you. From generation to generation, the Dor Vador, we give honor to her life by remembering who she was, what she stood for, and then by accepting upon ourselves part of her life's mission. And so we remember her hospitality, her generosity, her warmth. She was sincere and genuine. She was bold and strong. She was full of life and vigor, athletic. She was curious and adventurous. She was loving and caring. She had a big heart. She loved her family. So friends, may we all strive to carry on that spirit. May we all live as she would want us to live. And in that way, may Nancy's memory truly be for a blessing. Together we say, Amen. Friends, we'll now recite the El Male prayer. And it's a prayer that her soul finds rest and peace. Our bodies are mortal and return to the earth. And we now pray for the well-being of her eternal soul. So we rise for the El Male.
El Male Rachamim Shochein Bamromin Hamsei Menocha Nechona Tachat Kanvei Ashchina B'ma'alot kedoshim utorim ki zohar hakiyam asirim et nishmat Ruth בת פורשה ולו שהלכה לעולמה. בגן עדן תהא מנוחתה. אנא ברחמים, הסתיריה בסתר כנפיך לעולמים. וצרור בצרור החיים את נשמתה. אדוני הוא נחלתה. ותנו לך בשלום על משכבה. ונאמר אמן.
El Malei Rachamim, exalted, compassionate God, grant infinite rest in your sheltering presence among the holy and the pure, to the soul of Nancy Rosen Davis, who has gone to her eternal home. Merciful One, we ask that our loved one find perfect peace in your eternal embrace. May her soul be bound up in the bond of life. May she rest in peace. Together we say, Amen. Friends will now continue to the burial site.